Good morning, good afternoon, welcome. We're glad to have you here with us for this embargoed press briefing on the 2025 Federal Policy Blueprint from the Carbon Capture Coalition. My name is Ben Finzel, president of Renew PR, and we are proud to be on our 9th year of partnership with the coalition. And I don't know how many blueprints that is, but it's my pleasure and privilege to be serving as moderator for today's conversation. Today's event is designed to provide invited reporters with the opportunity to learn more about the policy blueprint and ask questions of some of the members and staff who helped to develop it. As a reminder, the embargo lifts at 5 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, Friday, February 28th, 2025, and any stories can run after that time. In a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Coalition Executive Director Jesse Stolark, but first let me share just a little bit about today's agenda. After Jesse's opening remarks on the blueprint, we'll hear from our blueprint czar, Coalition Public Policy Manager Christian Flynn. Christian shepherded the blueprint from outline to finished product, and he will share a high-level overview of what's actually in it. From there, I'm going to moderate a roundtable discussion with leaders from Calpine, Net Power, Bipartisan Policy Center, and ClearPath. And then we'll have our usual live Q&A, and you reporters will have the opportunity to ask questions of our special guests and coalition staff. If you have questions now, you're welcome to type them into the Q&A box if you want to get ahead of the curve. I will do my best to answer them in the order in which we've received them. But now let's get started with a welcome and background on the blueprint from our very own Jesse Stolark, Executive Director of the Carbon Capture Coalition. Jesse.
Thanks, Ben. You can go to the next slide, Leo. So just before we get started and get into our excellent discussion today, just wanted to give you all a little bit of context on the Carbon Capture Coalition. If you aren't already aware of us, I know many of you I've spoken with, in fact, very recently. But the Carbon Capture Coalition, we are a nonpartisan collaboration of more than 100 members spanning companies, labor unions, conservation and environmental organizations. Coalition members, essentially, we want to see a world where carbon management technologies are a widely deployed emissions abatement strategy, and we are working towards that vision by building broad, durable, bipartisan federal policy support for nationwide deployment of these technologies. And if you want to see our full membership list, you can go to our website. You can go to the next slide. So just providing a little bit of context on what are carbon management technologies, what does this refer to when we talk about carbon management technologies? Carbon management technologies are a full suite of technologies to manage, remove, and abate carbon dioxide emissions as well as carbon monoxide emissions. And it is inclusive of all the technologies that you see represented here on the screen. So that includes carbon capture at power and industrial facilities, and in the power sector, that includes natural gas and coal-fired power generation. In the industrial sector, it includes a wide variety of key industrial sectors that are crucial for the finished goods and materials that we depend upon for our modern lives, including steel, cement, chemicals, hydrogen, ammonia, as well as others. It also includes carbon dioxide removal directly from the atmosphere, reuse of those captured either carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide for value-added products and materials, as well as transporting that CO2 for secure geologic storage, either onshore or offshore in secure formations where they're safely stored permanently. You can go to the next slide. So as Ben kind of mentioned, we're here to talk about the federal policy blueprint, and I'm really excited to dig in with all of you today. So the federal policy blueprint, we re-release it at the start of every Congress, and it really outlines for both Congress and the administration a portfolio of necessary actions across legislative, regulatory, and implementation to achieve development, commercial demonstration, and deployment of the full suite of carbon management technologies across sectors. As Ben mentioned, it was developed through a consensus-based process, with our membership outlining an essential roadmap for the legislative, regulatory, and implementation actions necessary to continue driving the commercial deployment of these technologies over the next decade. And so taken together, the blueprint recommendations provide a roadmap for achieving nationwide deployment of carbon management technologies, and the recommendations contained within the blueprint will guide coalition engagement and strategy over the next 2 years. So that high level framing, I'm going to hand it back over to Ben.
Thank you, Jesse, and congratulations to you and the entire team. This was a team effort, so this is quite an accomplishment. Now it's my pleasure to ask our Blueprint czar to share an overview of the highlights of the Blueprint. Christian Flynn is Public Policy Manager for the Coalition, and he was the chief cook and bottle washer who got this Blueprint across the finish line. Christian, what do we need to know about what's in this document?
Thank you for that lovely intro, Ben. Leo, if you can go to the next, thanks. So folks, we want to start by just highlighting the timeline of some coalition activities and victories in carbon management. A lot of these were bipartisan in nature, and that's important because from our perspective, that's how we're going to be accomplishing the most moving forward. A couple of things to highlight are the Future Act, which in 2018 passed a lot of enhancements to 45Q, and then the Carbon Capture Coalition launched with more than 50 organizations. A couple of other ones is our first blueprint was published in 2019, talking about the first ambitious portfolio of federal policies, which in turn eventually led to 2021 and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which created the current framework surrounding 45Q and other investment and incentive mechanisms surrounding carbon management. Finally, in 2023, we published our most recent blueprint before this 2025 edition, and the 2025 edition is building upon the requests made in 2023. Yeah, next slide. So a couple of leading indicators as far as project development that resulted from the 45Q tax credit, which remains to this day the key federal policy mechanism to incentivize carbon management projects. The series of investments that have been made over the past few years have resulted in around 276 announced projects across industry, power, and direct air capture. And the current queue of individual Class 6 well applications is hovering at around 160. That is at the federal level. At the state level, we have around 88 more applications that are currently under review by states with primary enforcement authority, which is granted by the EPA. Next slide. And then finally, there are several policies that are driving direct investment, but the big thing to take away here is that the 119th Congress and the administration have to solidify and grow the role of American leadership in developing and deploying these technologies so that they can continue deploying economy-wide. This is best realized through federal carbon management policies, which, as you see on screen, resulted in the direct investment of around $1.7 billion across 10 states, representing diverse regions across the country. As you see, they are geographically diverse areas, so that really speaks to the applicability of carbon management. And then, as I mentioned previously, the investments made through the IIJA have made a lot of this possible. The next slide. And then one thing to note is that despite this really robust framework that we have in place, a lot of projects are finding that 45Q levels are still falling short. If you look at the graph on screen, you'll see that we have an arrow pointing at the $85 credit per ton, which is the current level. That does not make a majority of projects economically feasible. And so this is one of our big undertakings with this blueprint, is trying to maximize the value of 45Q. Sectors that make up the carbon management value chain do face significant headwinds at this point. And the real takeaway here is that these policies that are currently in place mark the beginning, not the end, of the efforts to build the portfolio of necessary federal policies for economy-wide deployment of carbon management technologies. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to give you a brief overview of what's contained within the blueprint, which is essentially a framework for how we want to deploy these technologies nationwide. So it starts by looking at ensuring investment certainty, developing the market for these technologies, developing next generation technology within carbon management, and strengthening our transport and storage infrastructure. All of this is framed within community and workforce development concerns, which is essentially job creation and ensuring that host communities of projects receive the benefits of those projects to help local regions, to help the economy of the local communities. The big thing here is that there has been significant inflation between 2020 and 2022. And we are trying to work within that framework to, again, maximize the value of 45Q for carbon management technologies to deploy. Leo, back to Ben, I believe.
Thank you, Christian. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest speakers. I'll ask them all to come on camera. We're going to have a roundtable discussion on the blueprint, and we are delighted to be joined by 4 coalition members representing the power sector and the advocacy community. They are Calpine Executive Vice President of Commercial Operations, Caleb Stevenson, Net Power Head of Energy Policy, Jack Thierolf, Bipartisan Policy Center Senior Managing Director of the Energy Program, Zan Fishman, and ClearPath Carbon Management Senior Program Manager, Savvy Bowman. Thank you all for joining us today, and welcome back to Jesse as well, because Jesse's part of the roundtable. So as a reminder, we're going to begin our Q&A after this roundtable conversation. If you'd like to ask a question, like Carlos already has, thank you, Carlos, you can put it in the Q&A box now, or you can wait till we get started in about 15-20 minutes. So let's get on to the roundtable. First, I want to ask a broad question, I guess basically for all of you. What about the deployment of these technologies is of greatest concern to you right now? And I guess I'll start with Jesse.
Thanks, Ben. I'll just put a finer point, I think, on some things that Christian sort of teed up in his introduction of the blueprint, which is, we have this incredible policy framework in place with 45Q as sort of that foundation. And that was really enacted over the past several years, past several Congresses. At the same time, we know, just looking at where we are in terms of deployment and where we need to go, that we're falling short by quite a bit. Some of the goals and benchmarks, so globally, according to the International Energy Agency, we need to capture 1 billion tons of CO2 globally by 2030, and then around 6 billion tons by mid-century. And while we've seen an impressive spate of projects announced, not only here domestically, but also just globally, but we're also really far off the mark in terms of where we need to go. And so what that's telling me is that we need to develop and enact additional policies here in the US to not only ensure that we're staying on track with that goal, but to ensure America's role in kind of being the global leader in this technology deployment. And so I'm sure that others are going to kind of dive into specific priorities, but I'm thinking about it kind of more of that global level about what's needed next really to move the ball forward.
Thank you, Jesse. Who else wants to chime in next?
I'm happy to jump in.
Great.
First, I'll say thrilled to be here, and I think we're on the brink of deploying this technology. We're on the brink of commercializing this technology. We are poised to start seeing this thing actually happen and become a part of our energy mix. We think it's a viable technology to create firm, dispatchable, 24/7, affordable American low-carbon electricity and help dispel concerns about the irrefutable need for natural gas-fired facilities to operate for decades to come. We've been working on this for a long time, over 2 administrations at this point. We have a pilot facility that's operating with our partner, Ion Clean Energy, and also with the DOE. It's operating safely, reliable. It's capturing north of 95%. So one of the things we're not worried about at this point, if you're asking questions about concerns, is does the technology work? We're seeing it work. We're engaged with other projects around the world seeing it work. We are the largest natural gas-fired generator in the country. We're the largest consumer of natural gas for power generation. We have in our fleet 78 plants, 60 plus of those are natural gas fired, and we see at least a dozen sites in our portfolio of plants where this technology makes sense. So we're not concerned about whether the technology works. All the elements of the process are mature. They've been used in other applications for decades. The challenge, and this is what we're concerned with, is scaling and getting across the finish line, what the industry needs, what we think we need. And the biggest concern we have to make this thing happen is just to get through projects. We need to get through projects. And by getting through and learning and seeing changes that we can make to the design, ways to standardize, ways to share best practices across projects, ways to share inventory across projects, our programmatic approach can identify ways to drive costs down and make this thing a bigger part of our energy mix, and it can bolster U.S. energy. So we certainly have challenges to work through yet, but we're excited about it. We think we're poised to make this thing happen.
Thanks for the optimism, Caleb. Savvy, you look like you're ready to go.
Thank you so much, Ben. And yeah, I mean, I'd echo a lot of the sentiments, but I think I want to spend time talking about the three main areas where I think, the U.S. is particularly poised to, through Congress, unleash a lot of the carbon management technologies that are in our pipeline today. So first being permitting, second being infrastructure build out, and the third being getting projects from demonstration to commercialization. The next 4 years present the opportunity to start putting steel in the ground and get closer to that billion-ton scale Jesse was talking about that's needed for carbon management. And demonstration projects are part of the key to implementing integrated CCUS projects, and they play a critical role in helping drive down the cost and also then getting to that commercial scale. We were highlighted, or Christian highlighted the infrastructure package, which has been critical in helping a lot of these carbon management projects get the resources that they need, but they have been stymied by inflation and increased project costs, to Jesse's earlier point. So building out infrastructure is really going to be needed, particularly for storage and transportation of carbon dioxide. We're excited to see that this administration is motivated to work on streamlining permitting and efficient permitting, especially for Class 6 permits. Last week, we saw that West Virginia recently made their announcement that EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin resubmitted a final rule granting West Virginia Class 6 primacy. And the rule will be then finalized in 30 days on March 28th. So really exciting momentum, I think, in the carbon storage space. And we need that continued momentum if we're going to be able to build out additional carbon storage, as well as transportation through pipelines and other investments, key investments like 45Q, making sure that they are still applicable and robust to be able to build out those projects that we need for the next couple of years.
Thank you, Savvy. It is always about momentum, isn't it? Jack or Zan, one of you want to go next?
I'll pick it up. And again, want to echo a lot of the comments that we've heard already, which is congrats and thank you to the coalition for this product. And agree that there's a lot to be optimistic about. We are a technology company. Things that I worry about are not technology, right? We have proven carbon capture can work. We need to deploy at scale. The things that we think are the biggest barriers to doing that and doing it quickly at the pace that like the electricity grid needs, that our environment needs, are again on permitting and infrastructure. And for us, the biggest, like literally looking at projects, the biggest holdups are how long does it take to do a Class 6 permit? What's the reliability? What lead time are we looking at to be able to get a project from concept to reality? And the other is interconnection, right? And that's a theme that you'd hear from us if we're talking about natural gas, wind, solar, battery storage. We have an electricity system that doesn't know how to grow as fast as we need it to for the demands that we have. And that's just a critical element that has a federal policy angle fixed to it. It also has a industry. We need more people who are able to work at the ISOs and get these applications completed. And I think there's another tie-in both on the interconnection and on the permitting side, which is learning how to build big things again as a country. And it's something that our CEO has said, which is like build, baby, build. We have to build out infrastructure to meet these needs. There's a cultural element of it, and there's an element on the industry too, to really win and earn strong local support for our projects to demonstrate how they are in the interest for not just the electricity system, but for the local communities where we're building. That's a huge opportunity and something I think that we're going to be able to do really well, and that having that strong local support can help push ahead some of these policy elements. So for us, what we worry about is like, can we interconnect? Can we get a Class 6 permit? If the answers to those are yes, and the answer is 2 years instead of 5, that's transformative.
Jack, thanks for the real world check-in there. That's super helpful. Zan.
I'll make two major points. One is around policy and one is around permitting. Policy is prologue, and the companies are going to respond to the policies that are in place. And they're going to respond in the best way for America if there's a degree of certainty that those policies are going to be durable and that they can look into the future at the investments they want to make today that are going to take time to permit and build and then operate. And so the durable policies, which almost always are bipartisan in nature, are what we really need, rather than having kind of wild swings from one administration to the next. That's point number one. Point number two is permitting, which pretty much everyone has already brought up. And, permitting is where I spend a lot of my headspace. And the point I just want to make there is that permitting is good, but a permitting system should be efficient because you want a system in place to make sure everything is safe. We want to have a healthy environment. We want to have healthy Americans. And we don't want projects to, get built willy-nilly without good safety standards. However, there is such a thing as being too careful, right? That old adage, measure twice, cut once, right? When you're doing something that like makes a real difference in the world, or like cutting a piece of wood that you can't uncut, like it's okay to be careful. Careful is good, but the adage isn't measure 4,372 times and cut once, right? There is a such thing as too careful, and if you're too careful and your process takes too long, things actually just get worse, right? You don't get the quality of life benefits from building your new infrastructure. You don't get the economic benefits from building your new infrastructure, nor do you get the climate benefits from building your new infrastructure, or the energy affordability benefits from building your new infrastructure. So what we just need is just a logical, efficient system to get to a yes or a no in a predictable, transparent, reasonable amount of time.
Measure twice, cut once. Very good advice. Thank you, Zan. I want to dive in a little bit on something that Savvy brought up, that Jesse also brought up, and that is another I word, inflation. So 2022, the coalition was central to realizing enhancements to 45Q that included a credit value increase, and Jesse and Christian both talked about that. But thanks to inflation, which we've also talked about, and some other economic factors, the real value of the credit has been significantly eroded. So how concerning is this fact for projects in the pipeline and those being considered in the future? And Savvy, I think maybe since you brought up inflation, you might want to go first.
Sure. So given that projects currently in the US are kind of waiting to see what IRS is going to publish on 45Q, and we have this sort of opportunity coming up with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expiring, and the opportunity to perhaps even improve some incentives that were prior on the table. Developers, and many, Calpine can speak to this, and Net Power as well, on the value of exactly 45Q enduring and supporting projects into the future. But inflation adjustment would essentially help create more relevancy for projects today. Adjusting for inflation immediately or using even a baseline of 2021 or 2022 would help the credit create more real value in today's market. And high inflation in recent years has just eroded a significant portion of the credit value to maintain sort of the impact that it has. And so in order to do that, there's interest in project developers and stakeholders alike in the industry to kind of get that inflation adjustment on the table. I know Jesse can kind of speak to those details as well, but there's other things as well in 45Q, which I think could be interesting, where we would create more parity, particularly for the utilization value and dedicated storage to bring more projects online, and then also have construction deadlines updated, because carbon management projects have long lead times, and to incentivize innovation, 45Q could be extended to give developers the assurance that a project will qualify for 45Q. And it's critical for developers to see that pathway for claiming 45Q at the time they're fully operational, to attract even additional financing.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in on the I question before I move on?
Just that.
I'll just add that.
Go ahead,
Jack.
You got it. Yeah.
All right.
Caleb.
So we're working hard. We're working hard with our project partners to finalize costs for the 2 large demonstration projects we've got in the works. We're working with some of the best engineering construction firms in the country, if not the world, to try to nail down these costs. And there's a lot of scrubbing going on. There's a lot that can be done in terms of innovation to drive down costs, but absolutely inflation has been significant. And adjusting the 45Q credit value for inflation makes perfect sense. I would say equally important is improving investment certainty. And there are some more technical and operational elements of the 45Q that we talk about that you all have reflected in the blueprint that could be helpful as well. Certainty, clarity, operating ways to operate the units that make sense. Those would be helpful too, but making an adjustment for inflation makes perfect sense given what's going on around us.
Thanks, Caleb. And Jack, I think you get the last word on this one.
Yeah, just add that I think just from a policy, like good policymaking basis, 45Q is unique in not being treated the same as everyone else on inflation, indexing to 2025 instead of when the bill was actually written, isn't in line with other credits. So there's a coherence and kind of fairness element as well built into the proposal, not only needed, but justified from like a policy design basis.
Thank you. So another question, the US has long been a leader in carbon management technologies. We all talk about that frequently, but other countries are catching up, and often because they're putting supportive policy frameworks in place. So question here, does the US risk being left behind? And if so, what do we need to do to make sure that we remain the global leader? Guessing several of you have thoughts there. Who wants to go first? Caleb, you're looking like you're ready to say something.
I'm happy to jump in. Also happy to let others jump in.
Go
I don't
for
think
it.
we're going to be left. I don't think we're going to be left behind. I think we are on the brink of commercializing this technology, and I don't think and I'm talking Congress, I'm talking all constituents, we are not going to allow ourselves to be left behind. We have too many great geologic sequestration resources available to us in the country. We have low-cost natural gas. It's a way to harness this energy and to continue to bolster American energy and reliable energy, dispatchable energy in the country. And I don't think we're going to let this technology opportunity pass.
Good, thank you. Savvy, you look like you were about to speak as well.
Yeah, I think Kale made a really great point that, in the US, we have an immense amount of natural resources, especially for storage and natural gas. And I think that really places us in an advantageous position. And so when we're talking about carbon management technologies and the innovation that's coming out of the pipeline, the US is leading globally when it comes to those innovations and developments. Now, deployment of those technologies is challenging no matter where you are in the world. But if America is going to continue to lead the world in innovation and common sense, like permitting structures to help build out these innovative projects safely and efficiently, to Zan's point, to then test and deploy these new technologies, we're going to have to do a couple things in our opinion at ClearPath. Streamline the permitting process where we implement, efficient, predictable permitting structures to accelerate project deployment, strengthen the policy support to get more 45Q support to projects, increase funding for RD&D, because even though the carbon capture and carbon removal projects that are going through the innovation pipeline today are cutting edge, there's always ways to iterate and continuously improve. And I think that should not be forgotten. And then also just building out the infrastructure.
Thank you so much.
And I would add and Kev, I agree, like there's too many benefits. In the US, there's too many natural advantages to really lose out. What we could lose out by not maximizing the opportunity is all the things that carbon capture in the power sector can help unlock. And that is being a world leader on manufacturing, being a world leader in data center deployment. We have a chance to take what is an abundant, affordable resource in US natural gas and convert it to an even more valuable resource, which is ultra low emission electricity that helps us achieve our economic and our environmental goals. That's such a compelling piece. There's 1,000 problems to solve for each project to get from that kind of vision to reality. But that's really what's at stake. Is not necessarily losing a CCS industry to one country or another, but losing what that CCS industry can provide more broadly for the country.
Thank you, Jack. So we've got, as Jesse mentioned, we have two companies on the panel that are actually working right now, today, to deploy carbon capture in the power sector. And Kaylee even mentioned some examples of it. I'm wondering if you could each talk a little more about why we need carbon capture in the power sector and why now is such a critical juncture.
Jack, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, I'll take it. So, and for those who don't know, Net Power, we're a technology company. We are developing what is a unique natural gas turbine that is designed to inherently capture 97+% of emissions. It's not a post-combustion technology, which is great, not casting aspersions on it, but it's a different approach that we think will be scalable in a way to really drive tremendous benefits. Our intention is to have our first utility scale project. We intend that to be in West Texas, coming online likely in 2028. We have a test facility outside of Houston, and what we see is just the market demand is incredible. We need electricity. The era of flat or low demand growth is over, for a lot of good reasons. And there's tremendous demand for electricity that is rampable, dispatchable, all the good things that natural gas power plants can provide today. There's also a clear need and demand, whether it's at a federal or state regulatory level, or whether it's from a customer level, whether that's residential customers who want a certain type of electricity or large corporates and technology companies, to have their electricity have an absolutely minimized carbon footprint. And we think that there's an incredibly catalyzing role for natural gas with CCS to provide that, to meet that both like at a system level and an individual customer level, for those who are looking to maybe do 24/7 matching for their own consumption and their own emissions profile. So there's an incredible demand for what this technology can provide. We now just need to get it done, get steel in the ground, and build up let's say like the customer confidence and the technology confidence.
Sensing a theme here, but thanks, Jack. Caleb.
Yeah, I echo those comments. This is the era of firm, reliable, 24/7, affordable, low carbon power. Natural gas units today provide 40% plus of the electricity in the country. We expect that to continue to increase as older coal plants continue to retire. Several years ago, we used to get questions about the longevity of our gas fleet, especially given our significant operations in California. And as of this moment, industry participants virtually all understand that we are going to need to operate natural gas units to support the grid in an increasing manner over the coming decades. So addressing carbon or reducing carbon from these facilities addresses concerns that some folks have about whether that's a good thing or not. So we're trying to work hard to foster this technology. There's a market, as Jack said, for low carbon power, also steam. We operate a lot of cogen facilities, so we sell steam to industrial processes that are co-located. And this is one of the ways to reduce the carbon intensity of those products. This is an export issue as well. We have low-cost natural gas in this country, and there are markets around the world where customers are increasingly interested in low CI, low carbon intensity products. And so we can harness U.S. energy, harness U.S. natural gas, reduce the carbon emissions, reduce the carbon intensity, and bolster exports. And this has a variety of benefits that come along with that. So that's why we're focused on it, and we see this technology as within reach. We're continuing to work through the costs, as we've talked about previously. We need continued support, and we expect continued support. This is an opportunity that I don't think we're gonna let pass.
Thank you, Caleb. So today, the Republicans have control over all three branches of government. While the supportive policy frameworks for these technologies stretch back more than a decade, as we have discussed, some of the most recent enhancements and support, including the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, were enacted when the Democrats had majority control. Given these changes and their resulting impacts on the political climate, let's talk a little bit about how we are all approaching these topics with this new majority. So question about demand for products. So the demand for cleaner, sustainable energy and products continues to grow. I'm wondering how you're communicating the necessity of these technologies and other issues related to carbon management in this context. Looking at faces, it looks like either Savvy or Caleb might want to go first, but I'll leave it up to you.
Sure. Happy to go first here. So I think you said it well, Ben, like there is rising demand for clean and low carbon products. And I think that in and of itself is dictating a lot of the market right now, and cleaner energy and products generally are no longer optional. They are critical to meeting consumer demand, and corporates are setting climate goals for themselves to basically reach net zero by 2050. And there's also global decarbonization targets. So if you layer all these things together, carbon management technologies are sort of essential to achieving those objectives. And they're competing against a ton of other sort of clean energy technologies. And so in order to be able to, ensure that the innovation pipeline continues and grows quickly, we're going to need robust sort of policy and also permitting to get a lot of that going. And I think I'd also underscore that a lot, like to Caleb's earlier point, a lot of the potential here is that like US has some of the cleanest steel in the world, some of the cleanest cement in the world. And we're only continuing to grow in the amount of sort of like low CI materials that we have. And being able to export these new innovative technologies to other countries that are also trying to decarbonize is a huge potential area for the United States. Steel manufacturing in the US is particularly clean because we do processes like electric arc furnaces and recycle a lot of scrap steel. But then also through our new processes like direct reduction, we're able to kind of cut those emissions from primary manufacturing in half. So getting those processes globally deployed, especially to countries like Japan, to South Korea that are really trying to decarbonize and don't have a lot of square footage to implement storage, particularly where they need those capture facilities, and then perhaps we partnerships on storage in the future. So continuous growing partnerships that are available and on the table that the U.S. is poised to take advantage of here.
Thank you. Caleb, I think you wanted to answer this one as well.
I'll just add, Ben, the way you phrased the question was, how are you communicating the necessity of the technologies? I don't think it's hard. I think a broad set of stakeholders understands the benefits, the very broad types of benefits of this technology. And so it's really on us as the industry and certainly all of our stakeholders to get these things across the finish line and demonstrate that they work and that they can be an increasing part of our energy mix.
Thank you.
And if I could add in, you posed the question with the preface that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the IRA passed under Democratic control, which is true. However, it's worth remembering that the energy section of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was largely taken from the Energy Act of 2020, which was passed under Trump. And it just, actually appropriated the money for the programs that were authorized in that Energy Act of 2020. And a lot of those were carbon capture related, the industrial demos, there's, DAC, direct air capture policies within that. And then the IRA, of course, that passed under reconciliation. But if we're kind of focusing on carbon capture for this conversation right now, the 45Q tax credit that was included in the Inflation Reduction Act, had previously been introduced as a bipartisan bill. Right? There is bipartisan support for these policies, regardless of who happens to be in control of either chamber of Congress or the White House. And so, because there's bipartisan support, and there's bipartisan support because it's a pretty clearly needed supported technology, right? It's good for communities, it's good for environment, it's good for Americans, it's good for the world. So when we're thinking about like what's driving demand, it's all of these things. There is demand, both domestically and abroad, for lower carbon intensity products. And the U.S., as Savvy said, we're starting with a terrific advantage on reduced carbon intensity and our ability to generate products. And as we're able to deploy carbon capture, that carbon intensity advantage that we have is going to increase. And it's going to be a really great competitive advantage for us in international trade.
Thank you, Zan. And good point. We have a chart in the blueprint that shows all the progress over the years in both Republican and Democrat dominated times. So certainly a bipartisan technology. One last question for you, and then we need to get to our reporter questions. We're now halfway into the president's first 100 days, and the Republicans are working to advance a significant tax package and also to realize some major budget deficit reductions. So given that context, I want to talk about the P word that Zan mentioned, permitting. And last year, it felt like at least the second half of the year, every conversation we had about energy was permitting, permitting, permitting. We've talked about it a little bit today, but there do seem to be a lot of competing priorities. So just wondering if one or two of you can just give us a sense, is a bipartisan permitting reform package still in play? Are there other ways, aside from legislation, to streamline the nation's permitting regime for mission-critical energy projects? And what should Congress and the administration be doing to ensure that projects can succeed and proceed? Some of you have talked about this a little bit already, but I'm wondering, Zan, because you brought it up, maybe Savvy, you brought it up, just quick thoughts there before we move on.
I'm happy to start. I think we are going to see a significant amount of permitting action this year, right? We've already seen the Trump administration do some things at the executive level, and I suspect they're going to do more. There's also talks of what can happen under reconciliation on permitting, though it's fair to say that pathway is going to be quite limited because of the rules of reconciliation. But I think both of those things are going to play out a little bit over the first half of this year. And then as we get into the second half of this year, we're going to say, all right, some stuff happened at the executive level, some stuff happened in reconciliation. It wasn't nearly enough. We need to do a lot more on permitting. And that's when a bipartisan bill, I think, is going to take shape again. And we've already seen action in Congress, just so we're clear, that, the EPW committee under Chair Capito and Ranking Member Whitehouse held a hearing on permitting where both the chair and the ranking member, the Republican and the Democrat, both expressed a desire to do a bipartisan bill. So I am optimistic that we are going to see some progress this year.
Thanks. Savvy, did you want to weigh in before I move on?
Yeah, I would just echo that sentiment. I'm also very optimistic that we're going to see something on permitting this year. We're at an inflection point with historic investments through a lot of the bills that were mentioned, the Trump Energy Act of 2020, the infrastructure package, and then currently this new administration that's willing to unleash American energy through permitting reform. So I'm optimistic that this administration is motivated to find that path forward for permitting to get more steel in the ground.
Thank you. Let's get to our open Q&A, and we have a bunch of questions already in the Q&A box, so very happy about that. First one is from Carlos Anchondo at E&E News. He says, the Department of Energy is reviewing loans and grants currently. To what extent is the coalition concerned that DOE might not issue loans and grants for carbon capture and removal projects? You want to start, Jesse, and then if anyone else wants to weigh in?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Carlos. I would say without further guidance from the administration, it's hard to speculate on what's going to happen exactly. But, as you saw on the map earlier that Christian showed about the investments that have already been made thanks to this framework of policies that's now in place through the infrastructure law. There's billions of investments that have already been made. And so the risk is right now of pulling back is really catastrophic. Because it would risk these investments in communities and projects across the nation. And so I think, not only does that risk the projects themselves, but it risks deployment and kind of those investments that have already been made. And so just right now, I think there's just a lot of uncertainty around what this is going to specifically mean for these projects and broadly for these sectors.
Thank you, Jesse. Anyone else before I keep going? Okay, I'm going to go. Carlos asked another one, but I just, in the interest of fairness, because we have several different folks asking, I will come back to your second one, Carlos. John Beers from Agence France Presse asks, under a best case scenario, when is the soonest that we could see carbon capture and sequestration in the US at a significant scale? What is your vision of how this would operate in practice? Where would the sites be geographically? In all major industrial centers? ? I'm thinking Caleb might want to address that because you were so strong on that before, but anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see significant deployments this decade. Our project, one of our 2 demonstration award projects that we're working on with the Department of Energy, we're targeting a 2028 COD that will be close to 2 million tons per year of capture. And to me, that's pretty significant already. We have a pipeline of projects that we hope to move through beyond that. In aggregate, we've identified at least 12 projects where we think this technology could make sense. In terms of the part of the question with respect to geographies, the areas where we see projects, at least for us, being concentrated are along the Gulf Coast in Texas, and then also through the center of California, where in both locations there are excellent geologic storage opportunities. And there are other places in the country where we see good carbon sequestration opportunities as well. It's not the full country, but it's a lot of it. We have great geologic resources in this country, and combined with low cost natural gas, this is a great technology to bolster American energy.
Thank you, Caleb. Jesse, you came off mic. Did you want to say anything?
Sure, I would just build on what Caleb said. If you look at the more than 270 announced projects in the U.S., that kind of gives you a good idea of the geographies. And it's, of course, not only where are those sources and where are the potential appropriate geologic storage formations across the country. And then looking forward, I absolutely agree with Caleb that, we anticipate seeing and need to see tremendous commercial deployment over the next decade. And what that's going to look like is really kind of the flourishing of what people refer to as hubs, where we're collecting emissions from multiple sources and then are able to transport them to appropriate geologic storage sites.
Thank you. Boy, we're getting some great questions here. Next one is from Siri Hadreen at S&P Global Platts. She says, question for everyone. If the Trump administration is cutting workforce at EPA, Interior, PIMSA, what does that mean for carbon capture storage permitting? Do you expect Class 6 well permitting to slow down even further? How about the release of offshore storage regs and pipeline regs? So we've touched a little bit on permitting already, but I'm sure there are folks who want to tackle that again. And anyone else want to jump in there?
I mean, I'll just say that if you want an efficient permitting system, you do need a well-qualified workforce with enough staff and resources to do the job. It's really important. On the Class 6 well question specifically, I think we're actually going to see more approvals of primacy at the state level. We've already seen that happen several times under the Biden administration. I think we're going to see more of that, which is logical because, most other types of class wells, 1 through 5 are already regulated at the state level. So seeing this go to the state level for CO2 just kind of makes sense. And so I think that's going to be a part of the answer on that particular question.
Thank you. Anyone else want to address that?
Yeah, I just want to add that, to my earlier point, West Virginia got primacy just the other week, and we're excited to see a lot more states that are joining the pipeline of applicants that are looking to get primacy. There's 8 more states, actually. If you look at the EPA website, it keeps a live tracker of all the states that are applying, as well as the projects that are currently in the backlog for going through the federal process for EPA. So yes, I definitely, want to underscore Zan's point that workforce is important in order to be able to get a lot of these projects off the ground. But with instruments like primacy that allow us to also, basically delegate to states and allow states to lead the way and use those resources to be able to build carbon management projects and get them off the ground, I think that's where we will see a lot of potential in the next 2 to 4 years.
Thank you. And I'll point out that Carlos Anchondo from E&E News also asked a question about cutting 65% of spending at EPA and wondering how that might affect the Class 6 program. I feel like you guys have sort of answered that, but Carlos, you're welcome to come back if it feels like we didn't. And Carlos, I see you have your hand up as well. I will get to you in turn, but I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask a question. So Craig Bettenhausen from Chemical and Engineering News is wondering what we are seeing around carbon capture utilization and storage on trash to energy plants. He says Maryland and Minnesota are considering dropping such plants from their clean power category, and he's wondered if that pressure could make carbon capture appealing to such facilities. Interesting. Anyone have a thought on that?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Craig, do you mean carbon capture at waste to energy plants or carbon capture at landfills then specifically?
And Craig, you're welcome to come off mute if you want to just say that live.
I'm just giving him the ability to talk really quick. You should have the ability to talk now, Craig.
I do mean the waste to energy facilities. Yeah.
Thanks. Jesse, do you or anyone else want to address that?
Yes, certainly. I think, it's not something that we were able to touch on in the prior discussion. It is something that's in the blueprint. I think as we look at installing these technologies across emitting sectors, not only does carbon capture have the ability to obviously capture CO2, but in doing so, you can actually address some of the other co-pollutants of the emission stream. And so I would assume that I have not personally looked into the issue, but the same would be true at a waste to energy facility. And so if there are concerns around other criteria air pollutants that are created during the combustion process, that capture could possibly be a way of co-capturing some of that, just given the way that these capture systems operate.
Thank you. Anyone else before I go to the next question? Okay, I'm going to point out that Bridget DeCosmo from Energy Intelligence is asking a same question about shrinking EPA and concerns about EPA resources. I feel like we've answered that in some of the responses to the other questions, but I do want to use that to piggyback just ahead to Isaac Windis, also from Energy Intelligence. He's wondering on primacy if, he said, doesn't it take substantial staff to process primacy applications? Would the staff cuts delay that process? So thinking more than one of you might want to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, just in anything that the government's going to need to do and approve, it's going to require staff time. There's no way around that. While there can be really good efficiencies and a logical path to having more states have primacy over CO2 sequestration wells, it will take federal staff time to approve those applications, because they have to ensure that the state, in fact, does have a plan to regulate them, at least with as high of a standard as EPA would otherwise have done.
Thank you, Zan. Anyone else? Other follow-up from Bridget, again about permitting. In a permitting reform package, what are the pieces that would be most helpful for addressing the Class 6 backlogs and transport infrastructure hurdles? And that's Bridget DeCosmo at Energy Intelligence asking that one.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So thanks for circling back to that, Ben. And so at ClearPath, we've also been spending time thinking creatively about what are the sort of paths forward to get carbon management projects continuously moving. And I think there's a couple of unique ways we can address this. And so one is granting states more primacy, but two is increasing in this time, especially with workforce constraints and things like that, where we're going to see a little bit of reshuffling, increased support from the Department of Energy to provide more technical assistance to EPA's Class 6 program will help streamline those reviews, providing the technical assistance, providing subsurface data, developing innovative carbon storage and monitoring tools, especially because right now we're storing carbon dioxide in saline formations, but we could also be storing them in basalt formations where it would be mineralized over a shorter time scale. And in Iceland, they're doing that right now. And I think that's something of an opportunity for the US as well to begin looking into. I also think that with the transportation piece, we're going to see the reauthorization of PHMSA. And so that's an opportunity to make sure that CO2 pipeline safety rules, CO2 pipelines broadly are represented and are provided further resources to be able to build out. And PHMSA has their CO2 pipeline safety rules that was released and under review. I think under this new administration, there's going to be a revision of that perhaps. And so we'll see updated version of that PHMSA rule provided, but ensuring that there's safety regulations and rules for CO2 transport in the United States is going to be critical. And then also for pipeline research and development to modernize pipeline infrastructure, not just for CO2 broadly, but even for natural gas, hydrogen, and a lot of these other amazing new technologies. And so modernizing existing and also future infrastructure through RD&D is critical. There's actually a bill, the Next Generation Pipelines Act, that would be super beneficial, particularly for this issue. It was introduced last Congress, and we'd like to see that move as well in this Congress. And so that and additional pieces on, streamlined permitting for carbon storage, especially through, carbon transportation, especially through working with states to be able to build out CO2 transportation infrastructure would be critical.
Thank you, Savvy. Jesse, do you want to add anything before I move on?
No, that was great.
Great. So I'm going to do a question from Yulia, and then I want to give Carlos Anchando the mic to ask his question because he has his hand up. So heads up to Leo just for that. So Yulia Georgiou from Carbon Pulse is wondering if federal funding becomes restricted in carbon capture build-out, can you talk some more about the private sector interest in U.S. development? So I'm looking at our two private sector folks.
Yeah, I'll just, I can start and just say that everything that we're doing is a combination of both. There's private funding, there's customer funding. We are going to have customers who have the appetite for the product, either power or steam, as a part of these projects. And the 45Q, of course, is important in our work with the DOE, and the DOE's funding of portions of the projects has been critical too. So it's a mix of everything. And as it sits right now, we need everybody's participation to get these things across the finish line. Our expectation and our goal is to standardize as we get through a project or two, start to find ways to save money, share inventory across projects, better sequence construction execution, drive down cost, so that we need certainly less from public funding sources and less from customers as well. And we think that's achievable with this technology.
Thank you.
For us, we're not today reliant on a DOE program. 45Q is central to the business case, as it is for a lot of like the tax policies for many different generation technologies. We'll say though that the DOE programs that are really focused on driving first of a kind technologies seem like quite prudent and like just a wholesome use of a government approach to spur innovation. But we're not reliant, but they, I think, play an important role catalyzing new technologies getting out to market, and that there's broad and long-standing consensus that that's an important role for DOE and others to play.
Great. Thank you very much, Jack. Carlos, I think you should be able to speak.
Hi, thanks, Ben. I wanted to ask you all, PHMSA has told me that their rule for, CO2 pipeline safety has been withdrawn. And we're seeing bills pop up. There's one currently in South Dakota that would have a CO2 pipeline moratorium until PHMSA finalizes its rule. So how concerned are you about possible moratoriums in, states? I think Illinois is also in that bucket. And the longer it takes for PHMSA to finalize its rule, what are the consequences of that?
Thank you, Carlos. Who wants to answer?
I can just say, Carlos, from the coalition's perspective, it's absolutely critical that PHMSA issue the rules to provide regulatory certainty to the industry so that they can move forward. I think not only in those states that have moratoriums until PHMSA is finalized, but also just more generally, you don't really want to go and build something until you understand exactly how you will be regulated. And so I think getting those regulations out there and proceeding with the public comment process and seeing if there is anything that needs to be addressed is a really strong way to move forward to again, just create that regulatory certainty that's much needed.
Thank you, Jesse. And I'm going to just do one more because we got another question from Energy Intelligence. You guys are all over this today. Thank you. Lauren Kraft is asking, with regard to increasing the 45Q program, how realistic is that considering the focus on trimming spending and cutting debt? Good question.
I can take that, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, you know, great question. I think 45Q is among a handful of tax credits that's very well supported by not only bipartisan members, but obviously by the Republican conference, and we've seen that strong support you know, early in this Congress. Obviously, it's still too early to tell what the details of any reconciliation package are, but we think that additional and necessary tweaks and changes to 45Q squarely fit within the majority and the administration's just focus on abundant, reliable, affordable energy. And so, you know, we feel really positive about the potential outlook there for seeing additional tweaks and enhancements to the tax credit.
Would anyone like the last word on that? No. All right. Well, we made it almost. It's 1:01. So that is it. The very fast lightning hour there. So that's it for this embargoed media briefing on the Carbon Capture Coalition's 2025 Federal Policy Blueprint. As a reminder, the embargo lifts tomorrow. It is still in effect today. So lifts tomorrow, Friday, February 28th, 2025 at 5 a.m. Eastern. Any stories you write can be published after that time. Please join me in thanking our special guest speakers, Savvy Bowman, Zan Fishman, Jack Thierolf, and Caleb Stevenson. And on behalf of Jesse, Christian, and the entire coalition team, thank you for your interest in the blueprint and for taking the time to join us today. We look forward to your coverage and to seeing you again on the next Carbon Capture Coalition media briefing later this year. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.